2015 arrives on Thursday, which means we're not jumping the gun too much by talking about the 2016 presidential race already. And it's a happy end of the year for Jeb Bush. 2 weeks after tweeting he was going to seriously consider a White House run, the former Florida governor and younger brother of former President George W. Bush finds himself getting a big boost in the polls. Jeb tops the new CNN ORC poll with 23% support. That's 10 better than Chris Christie. Former Johns Hopkins Hospital surgeon Ben Carson polls third, followed by Rand Paul, Mike Huckabee, and a Times Square-sized crowd of Republicans who are all under 5%. Now, Jeb's recent boost continues a theme we've seen from the GOP in recent cycles. Candidates make a little noise, make a little news, and then catapult to the top of the polls. In just the 2016 cycle and polling from this year, 9 Republicans have led or tied for the lead in polling. You can see the names up on your screen now. That follows a 2012 campaign that saw 11 different poll leaders, including such stalwarts as Sarah Palin, Rudy Giuliani, Newt Gingrich, Donald Trump, Michelle Bachmann, even Herman Cain, if you remember him. Go back to 2008 and you could add Fred Thompson and Condoleezza Rice to the mix for the GOP. For comparison's sake, only 2 Democrats have topped any poll since 2007, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, though obviously there was no Democratic primary in 2012. My first question is, why does this, and I called it flavor of the month, Tom, why does it seem to be that in the Republican presidential cycles, you make a little noise, you make a little news, all of a sudden you're #1 in the polls?
Well, I think because you go back to a time when we had primaries and there were a lot of candidates out there. This is going to be a different case. I think Jeb Bush is not a flavor of the week. He's a 2-term governor of the state of Florida, remains very popular in a very crucial state come 2016, and is very, very well thought of. So, I mean, I think Jeb Bush is going to remain very high in polling as we go forward.
And I think a lot of people think that Bush will be a strong candidate for the Republican nomination. But, Jeannie, we have seen an awful lot of shooting to the top of the polls in Republican circles. Is this a party that doesn't seem to have its identity square yet? Is there, what to your mind leads to that phenomenon?
It's way too early to look at polls on this. I mean, that's the honest to God truth. It is way too early to look at polls. And, you know, you look at the Democrats, of course they haven't had this multitude of candidates going back these 2 cycles because you didn't have a primary in 2012 and there were only 2 real candidates in 2008. So for the Democrats, you know, you look at these early polls, you have these constant contestants coming by. But I think that Jeb Bush is a formidable candidate, and you know who the formidable candidates are because they're the candidates who can actually raise the money, the $1.5 billion it's going to take to run a campaign. And he's one of them. Mitt Romney is another. Chris Christie is another. You know, there are some candidates. You know, you mentioned Dr. Carson. Bless his heart, he can't raise the money, and he's not a formidable candidate, and he's up in the polls because the polls don't tell you the truth about where we are at this point in the race.
Now the man who is at #2 in that GOP poll may be developing something of a home state problem. Chris Christie is now 10 points behind Jeb Bush in the most recent poll, and he's reaching all-time lows in the polls from New Jersey voters. His favorability has hit an all-time low. Job approval's underwater in the Garden State. Voters say they think Christie's making decisions based on national ambitions rather than what's best for New Jersey. Residents polled say they do not think he should run for president. They favor Hillary over Christie for president, and they want him to resign as governor if he runs for the White House. Richard, how much of a problem is home state popularity for a potential presidential candidate like Chris Christie?
Almost none. I think what Jeannie outlined is, I think, fundamentally, incorrect. Ben Carson is the problem for people like Chris Christie and Jeb Bush, who pose.
Carson? Ben Carson?
Yeah.
Dr. Ben Carson?
Can I finish?
Yeah, you can finish. But Richard, you have a better chance of being elected president than Ben Carson
I didn't
does.
say anything about who gets elected. I said he was the problem for Chris.
I really want to hear this.
He represents the fierce red meat attack on Obamacare, attack on Obama, attack on abortion, the kind of candidate who's going to force all these other guys way to the right. And the electorate in the United States is not that far to the right. Jeb Bush is out in front because people know his name. And he is, you know, not offensive on a whole bunch of levels. But he is going to be the guy they now start training their guns on. And it is the Ben Carson, Rand Paul, right-wing attack, because that's where the Republican electorate is. that is what these polls tell you to watch out for, not the fact that someone has 20%
That is
of the vote.
absolutely untrue. Ben Carson is not where the Republican electorate is. That is absolutely untrue. Look at his name recognition, Richard, and tell me that Ben Carson is where the Republican electorate is. That's fundamentally untrue. You can say that, but it is way too early to look at polls. You're looking at a very narrow margin of polls. You think a year out you can look at polls and think that Ben Carson...
I think you can look at the poll and not predict Ben Carson's going to win,
well,
but
absolutely
predict
not.
that the red meat, right-wing austerity, anti-Obamacare, anti-immigration
as portrayed by Ben Carson, absolutely not.
Well, but there
Rand
are
Paul
multiple
is
candidates.
not Ben Carson, and there are multiple candidates, but Ben Carson is not one of them.
He's going to define the race.
Ben Carson will define the race.
Yep.
That is fundamentally untrue.
Well, we'll see.
We will.
Can't we all get along?
Christmas is definitely over.
Ben Carson will define the race. That's news to me.
Let's put Ben Carson aside, because again, Mr. Brodsky or Tom Doherty or the professor or you have a better chance of being elected president or shaping the race, you guys do, than Dr. Carson does. Maybe some red meat to the conservatives. Jeb Bush is the guy to watch. Jeb Bush can raise the money, as you pointed out. Jeb Bush speaks Spanish. Jeb Bush can but his own emails tell the problem for him, Andrew. Those emails, those 250,000 emails he released, in which one of the subjects was from subjects not conservative enough, that's going to be the problem for him. Sort of like a Mitt Romney, are they going to destroy him and tear him down? That is the far right. But he's the best shot at, frankly, some would say the only shot at beating Hillary Clinton.
He's actually not. George Pataki's the best shot.
George Pataki?
As Richard Brodsky has already written.
Have you read that?
Of course I read that. And let me just...
you said, I know you worked with, you said Governor Pataki?
Let me just say...
Don't underestimate Look, he may stumble on
you can underestimate a lot of guys. Don't underestimate him. I'll leave it at that.
For the nomination?
What's the path? What's his path? Because it seems like there are bigger names with more money.
Yeah, but here's the path, and I think that the Republicans learned a very valuable lesson in this last cycle. Okay, is that let's take the crazies and put them aside. Okay, is that guys like Christie, guys like Jeb Bush, guys like George Pataki, guys who have won statewide elections. Okay, as quote unquote moderate Republicans. Okay. If you get into a primary with the Rand Pauls and the Ted Cruzes and the Bens, Ben Carsons, et cetera, there's a room there for George Pataki to go in and win crucial primaries early on.
Since we've been arguing with each other, let me step in now and say he's right. George is going to stand on the sidelines and let everybody cut themselves into shreds, and then at the right moment step forward and say, what about George? Now, it may not work, but it certainly is a coherent possibility.
It may not work. It's definitely not going to work. George Pataki, oh my God.
Thank you, Professor.
Are you kidding me?
Well, we have
Genie, I'd like to say, why not?
It's not going to work.
Wait, tell me
First of
why,
all,
then.
how can George Pataki raise the money he needs to run
Genie, are you kidding me? George Pataki?
Are you kidding me?
Genie, do you see how much money he has raised in the past? Are you telling
Tom,
me you
Tom,
don't think that George Pataki, a New York Republican, can raise money?
I think he's got a better shot than Ben Carson. I think he's got a better shot than some of these others. But George Pataki, a former governor from New York, making a play of it nationally in the general election is not going to happen.
I'll give Tom the follow.
And I know you worked for him, but I'm sorry, it's not true.
Of course, because you'd be the one to tell him he could never be governor of New York, and 12 years later, look what happened.
I thought he could be governor of New York. I'm sorry, I did.
Okay.
But I don't think he could be governor. I actually did. But I don't think he can be president in 2016. I'm sorry.
Look,
he could be something else, but not president.
Look, if you look at the hurdle that he faces, the hurdle is a Republican primary, okay? The person that Hillary Clinton would not want to face is George Pataki, because George Pataki sells across America and can compete in states like New Jersey and Connecticut, et cetera, et cetera.
George has a chance if the other guys cut themselves into ribbons, and he knows how to stand aside and let the other things happen.
And as Richard will tell you, there's not a smarter guy in the room, right? Right? Intellectually, could you
Who
sit
else
there?
is in the room?
And has brains really mounted to the top in the past in general elections?
We had comedy there for 1 second. We're going to take a quick break.
Has
Up
brains
next,
really done it?
we head back to New York City, where Mayor Bill de Blasio gearing up for his second year on the job. Is the mayor coming out of 2014 with more successes or failures under his belt? Panel weighs in when we come back.